even let's say if you were a 100-meter runner and you discover that actually you've got this natural ability to run, it doesn't mean that your next step is the Olympics. You still have to go through a training process where you really hone that ability. So as soon as you now see what your top 10 are, you may have naturally been using them in places, but actually still there is development that needs to take place with all 10 of those talents in order for you to maximize the ability that you have. And you still need to learn how to work those talents together with the other talents that you have in order to maximize those. So there's still a training period that you need to go to learn to maximize those.
Welcome to the HR L&D podcast, where we explore cutting-edge HR trends and best practices with top leaders who are shaping the future of work. My name is Nick Day, and I'm founder of JGA Recruitment Group, a specialist HR search firm. I'm also a qualified executive coach and a recognized HR thought leader listed on Thinkers 360. Together, we're going to dive into topics from diversity and inclusion to technology, learning curation, and employee experience to help you evolve your people and your development strategies. So whether you're a flourishing HR executive, a rising manager, or a seasoned CHRO who's driving transformation, this podcast is for you. So grab your coffee and let's play. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D podcast. My name is Nick Day, CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we're specialist HR recruiters. Remember, if you enjoy this show, please do subscribe to it. Please do share it with all of your HR colleagues and friends. And hopefully together we can all raise the profile of human resources for everyone globally. Now, today I'm really excited because I'm joined by John Obidipe, someone who formerly worked as a senior business analyst and business-focused change professional for over 10 years, where he was focused on strategic business change and process development before he pivoted and became a Gallup certified performance and development coach. He now specializes in the personal development of leaders, and he helps them to create really high-performing teams. He focuses on transformational, sustainable change, and he does this by working with clients from CXO to operational levels, but he delivers programs that meet a huge plethora of strategic objectives. I know this because, for full transparency, I'm someone that's actually undertaken one of his assessments myself, and I used John personally to walk me through that assessment as we went through. And I'm sure some of those insights may well come through during the course of this show, so stay tuned for that. But interestingly, his superpower, his ability is really all about discovering how we can unlock and unblock sometimes the real impacts and strengths that live within us all. And he does that to really help empower us to make a bigger impact, a bigger positive impact on the world. So without further ado, please let me welcome personal professional growth coach, John Obidipe, to the HR L&D podcast. John, how are you doing today?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. It's good to meet you again on a slightly different capacity. Usually it's me talking to you and in a coaching capacity, and today we're on a podcast show, so I'm very excited to get started.
No, I'm happy to be here.
So let me start the show. You know how it goes. First question for you today: what do the words human resources mean to you?
That is a great question. To me, human resources is all about managing the precious resource of human beings. Now, each of those human beings comes with lots of different abilities and capabilities. And so the human resources leaders, teams, they have that great privilege of managing the resource coming into the business through the life cycle of the business, and then obviously exiting the business. But it's really harnessing the power of all of those abilities that each human being brings into a business.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact you really focused on the human. I think there's a lot of debate at the moment as to whether human resources is still the right title. It's about human centricity and leading human centric teams. And I think there's a lot of people wanting to move the industry into people as the main title rather than resources. So yeah, I like the fact you focused on the human there. But I may well have butchered your introduction. I know you through the coaching capacity, but I would love it if you could bring I guess your experience to the table here. Just give the audience a bit of an insight into who you are and what you do, because you've had an interesting journey and that's brought you here today to the show.
Yes, yeah. So as you said in your intro, I used to be a change professional. So working with businesses, going through process change, system change. And I just found over the course of my career that working into processes and systems didn't really give me much of the satisfaction I was looking for in life. But actually, when I would be in conversations and interviews and calls with the actual individuals, the stakeholders that were making the changes or involved in the change, I found that I was much more inclined towards the person, their story, where they're trying to go. And although I was still successful in getting the job done, I didn't take my eye off that. There was a real connection with people and helping people kind of move forward. And those conversations would just naturally progress. So during the lockdown, as many people did, and actually for many years before that, I've been coaching in an unofficial sense. But during the lockdown, I made it official. And I really wanted to just try and understand how can I use the office of coaching to really be able to bring the most out of people and unlock them from this state of unhappiness in the roles that they may be working in. Because a lot of the time it's just, I'm not happy with where I am, but I don't know why. And that question has always intrigued me. So that was kind of my beginnings.
It's an old question as well. It's something that's repeated through since the dawn of time, right? But certainly since the pandemic, in the world of HR and people, we know there's a lot of people suffering from burnout, a lot of plates being spun in the air, trying to keep them all together, and it's quite difficult. Yeah. What I thought was really interesting when I met with yourself, we've met several times now before this show, is you have a real passion for what I would term positive psychology, focusing on strengths, not focusing on weaknesses, not necessarily looking backwards, looking forwards. So I wonder if you could just tell the listeners a little bit more about your ethos, I guess, but also more importantly, what is a unique strength? Because that's really, certainly in my experience of working with you, that's what we focus on. We focus on strengths, not on weaknesses. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so if I talk about my ethos first, my ethos is all about looking at where a person is good, where they are great, what positive things that they have to give to the world. And so on my journey of trying to work out how I entered this world of coaching, I stumbled upon a company called Gallup. And so they shared my ethos and I really connected with their ethos. They have a method around positive psychology. So the general premise is, for years, and I say this to all of my clients, so they'd have all heard this many times before, but for years, coming from childhood, and I've got 3 kids, so I know this very well, we talk to our kids, and as they age, the teenagers into sort of first jobs, all about what they're doing wrong, what they could improve on. But rarely is there a focus on the things that they actually do really, really well. And rarely is there a massive push to really expand on those things that are really, really good. You might see in the areas around football or, I don't know, particular individual areas, but not where a person is taken in terms of all of the things that they do well and those things magnified, those things maximized. So when we look at the Gallup approach, they use something called Strength Finder, which is a fantastic tool that really helps people understand what their unique strengths are. And so we put people through an assessment which uncovers all of these talents or strengths, and it shows from a range of areas what they are naturally, and natural is the key word there, what they're naturally inclined to be good at, what they naturally excel at without even trying, what is innate to them, so they can't turn it off, it's just natural to them. And we focus on how those strengths can be maximized in a person's job, whether they're a leader, whether they're a manager, or just a professional. How can those strengths and be maximized? But to really answer your question, the strength is something which is a natural ability that somebody has, a way that they think, a way that they behave, a way that they process things, which they just cannot turn off. It's just totally innate to them.
Amazing. We'll go into a little bit more about some of my results perhaps later on to bring that into context, because there were some interesting learnings from my perspective. And I think it was interesting when we met, I tended to focus on my own negatives or how I perceive negatives, and you kept repivoting and going, let's look at it a different way. So and I highlight that now because it must have played a part in the way, in the reasoning that you decided to follow the path you have in taking the Gallup approach. So where has all this come from? You said you were working in change, you're in the pandemic, you realized you're already coaching and it's something that you loved. But coaching is a very, very broad industry, and we can focus in many disciplines. Some are very niche, some are life coaches, executive coaches, specialist coaches in trying to quit a particular habit, whatever it might be. And you focus very much on strengths and positive psychology. I wonder if you, I guess, if you can just tell the audience what positive psychology is, because I think it's a term we're hearing a lot about, but people aren't necessarily fully fully familiar with the term yet, and why that was a kind of a path that really appealed to you.
Absolutely. So if I go again back to referencing Gallup, Gallup was started by a man called Donald Clifton. And he did an initial study which really looking at why leaders across the world are successful. And he focused on a full range, so there was no specificity to America or to the UK or to APAC. But what he found was that across the spectrum, old and young, leaders arrived at success in multiple different ways, but they all still arrived at success. So there was no one way to be excellent or to be successful. And so the more he studied, the more he found these groupings or these themes that were apparent patterns across those success methods that people used. And so what he decided to do is take these 34 themes that he'd really identified and identify them with particular names, which we could now call strengths. And so these strengths can now be seen within individuals after going through an assessment to really understand, I'm more naturally inclined towards getting to success through this method or through that method or using this ability or through this process of thinking. And so that's what we now term as strengths now. And so with this understanding, I can now look at myself in the mirror and see the things that I'm naturally strong at and my actual route to success being through those methods. And so now as a coach, what I was really drawn to is the fact that nobody has to be the same as the next person. We can all reach success, but it's going to be for our own unique way of doing it and our own unique combinations of doing it. But actually through those unique ways, we will all still arrive there. So let's all get focused on the way that we specifically get to success. And
so now I really like that approach, because when we talked about leadership offline, we sometimes think there's a cookie cutter approach to what a good leader is. And we look right or we look left and go, I wish I had that skill, or I wish I was more like that. And we sometimes therefore think that we're inadequate, or we lack the skills required to be a good leader. But actually, as you mentioned to me, offline, is the Clifton report really showed that there is no specific formula for what strengths make a great leader. And there are great leaders with all different types of strength profiles. And then when we did the assessment, of course, what I predicted would be my top strengths actually weren't necessarily what came out. And they were in the top 10, but they weren't number one and they weren't number two, and necessarily in the places that I thought they would be. And it was only really when we got under the cover of some of that stuff that I did end up in full agreement with where the strengths lied by the end of the conversation that we had. It took a lot of getting me there. But you also uncover things about yourself that I found were really, really useful in the way we do things day to day. So to give the audience a very quick, and there may be people that resonate with this. One example was, a lot of people say that, or my wife in particular, will often say, Nick, you're never present. Your mind's always somewhere else. You're never present. And I feel like I am being present, but we're watching a movie or we're talking about a problem or a business or whatever it might be. And I'm already thinking about how to solve whatever it is that's in front of me. So I am present. It's just my mind's raced on. And my number one thing that came back was strategic thinking. And when we looked at the strength report, you said, if me and my wife are looking at the same view, she's enjoying the view and she's present in inverted commas. I'm still present, but I'm already thinking about what I can do with that view, or how I might better utilize that in a different way. And it was really interesting to think for me, that's not a weakness then, because I had a concern internally, which I hadn't expressed to anybody. Even the first time I've done it publicly would be now, but I thought I had a problem where I could never be present.
Yes. And
it's just understanding that mindset really made me think, it's not even a weakness, actually. It's a strength. If I understand it, then I can hone it. I can use it to as a strength in that way. That was one example that I had, but there must be other examples you've had with clients which have really opened their thinking to enable them to be more effective. I wonder if you can share And I hope the
100%.
example I gave is a good one, but if you've got any others to share,
It's
I'd
a
love to hear.
fantastic one, and honestly, it warms my heart because it's too often that throughout the kind of school years or the earlier years of a person's life, they're told these things constantly that you are to this, you are to that, you're not enough this or not enough that. And actually, because somebody doesn't measure up to the cookie cutter or the shape that somebody else has in their mind, then suddenly they're not enough in themselves. And that's always frustrated me, because just because you can't recognize the brilliance in somebody's approach doesn't mean it's not brilliant. But I get it. If you don't have that knowledge, you don't recognize the brilliance. But I'm so happy that I can bring that to light for people. So in that case, your mind is super fast. It's constantly running ahead to see what is next. And if we apply that into that business context, you can see that in a meeting, as somebody's making a particular suggestion about a particular way we could go, your mind will be thinking 5-10 steps ahead and seeing where the pitfalls could be and seeing how we can navigate across that. Someone might have the idea but not necessarily have the method to get there, whereas you're already on that method, so you're already adding value to that conversation as soon as you start to offload what's in your mind about that suggestion, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I love the way that you take it all with a positive outlook, which is really great. So if someone's listening to this and they want to find out what their strengths are, and I recommend everyone does this. You know, I've actually to give some credence to this. It's not me just saying it. I've got my wife now to do the assessment. As you know, she hasn't done it yet, but I'm really intrigued to see how we fit together because we're so different. And I suspect I know what her strengths might be, having gone through the assessment now. But I'm really keen to understand if I'm correct, and really keen to understand if it helps her like it's helped me. So I'm brought in, but to get the people that are listening to the show, if they want to know what their strengths are, what's the process?
So it's really simple. Either you'd go through someone like me as a coach, and we'd set you up with the codes that you need. But essentially, you'd be going through a 30-minute assessment, and that takes you through a number of questions. Most of us have done these kind of assessments before, but I can assure you this is one of the most sophisticated assessments that exists. And so after that 30-minute assessment, it then spits out a report that shows your 34 talents in order. And what it does is then focuses on your top 10, because that's where you're going to have the most natural kind of connection to those particular talents. That's going to be where you most naturally flow. That's going to be the things that you naturally work through in terms of those top 10 talents. So once I as a coach get a view of your top 10 talents, I can then take you through and help you really understand who you are for your talents. Now, you don't necessarily have to go through a coach. You can just look at your top 10, and it gives you so much information from the reports that you get back. That might be enough for some people. But for some people, they want to really push forward and become the very best that they can be. And this is the very starting point, just understanding that top 10 and having a coach really run through the pros, the challenges, the things to really unlock the best out of those talents and how they work together. As I say, it's not just 10 that work independently. Actually, there's some dynamics that work together when you have one talent next to another, or one with another 3. So a coach can really help you understand that detail.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I remained skeptical all the way through, even right up until I got the strength report. It was only really when you brought it to life that I was converted in terms of my understanding of it. Really, I didn't mean to come in with such a skeptic point of view, but I did. And I think with so much generative AI at the moment, ChatGPT and things like that, sometimes I think it's the results you get need to be contextualized by a human for us to really get the biggest benefit. The reports are great, but for me, I got the reports, read them, and when you make your own interpretation, sometimes that can be dangerous. Having someone else interpret it for you can be really, really helpful. But that was my experience. But there were people listening to this and they go, okay, so we've identified what our strengths are.
Yeah.
But I want to know what they do next with those. But also, what about our weaknesses? Are they something we should be even considering at the moment, or should we really be staying in that positive mindset space?
So I'll take the 2 points. So in terms of what to do next, even let's say if you were a 100-meter runner and you discover that actually you've got this natural ability to run, it doesn't mean that your next step is the Olympics. You still have to go through a training process where you really hone that ability. So as soon as you now see what your top 10 are, you may have naturally been using them in places, but actually still there is development that needs to take place with all 10 of those talents in order for you to maximize the ability that you have. And you still need to learn how to work those talents together with the other talents that you have in order to maximize those. So there's still a training period that you need to go to learn to maximize those. In terms of weaknesses, I'll take it from two angles. If, let's say, I had the talent of communication, and I am very good at understanding that this is where my audience is right now, this is where I need to get them to, but there's a process I need to take them on to get them to that end point. Someone with a communication talent, or the talent of communication, slightly different to the normal definition of communication, they naturally understand how to take people on a journey with words, with pictures, with some sort of vehicle to get them to that end journey. It's a fantastic talent, and a lot of marketers will have that talent. On the flip side, someone with a communication talent can naturally be inclined to talk a lot. I love the sense of conversation. And so there are times where you need to learn when to talk and when not to talk. And we call those blind spots of the talent. You need to understand this is the power of the talent, but these are also the blind spots. So in the terms of weaknesses, that's what we would term as a weakness, the blind spot of a talent. On the other side, there are the areas of non-talent. So where you've got your concentration of your top 10, things you're most naturally inclined to be able to do and do really well. There's the other side where you've got your bottom 5, bottom 10, where there's really very little natural inclination at all. That's what we typically in the normal world call weaknesses. And so there can be the tendency to really concentrate, and most of life will teach us to concentrate on those things as weaknesses and really spend time trying to get them better. The problem is, with the most investment, you're never ever really going to be able to turn that weakness into any more than anything that's average. It will never ever become a strength because there's no natural inclination, there's no natural ability there. And so if I was an investor, would I spend my money, my investment capital in an area which could only be average, or would I spend it in something which could be have an exponential growth? And the thing for me is, let's put all of our time and our energy into those abilities that we have that can really help us see that genius level, that flow state, that real ability that can help us stand out and have that competitive edge against the people that we are kind of in business side by side.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can any recruiter understand my HR recruitment challenges? Please don't give up on your hiring challenges just yet. Here at JGA HR Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting and retaining top human resources talent. We also understand just how costly a poor hire can be. JGA HR Recruitment would like to partner with you to help you overcome your hiring challenges. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
A couple of things come to mind there, John. I mean, one is you mentioned earlier about children. Often, people's childhoods that we focus on the 3% we didn't get right, not 97% that we did in an assessment or something like that. But actually, you can bring that into the work context as well. Often, from a leadership context, people will spend their time on the weakest, in inverted commas, performers.
Yes.
And sometimes in doing that, we neglect the top performers that are actually responsible. There might only be 10 of those, but they're responsible for 90% of the sales. And yes. Instead, we spend all our time on the 90 others that only contribute 20% of the sales, whatever it might be. And often it's the wrong way around. And I think that was quite an interesting observation in how, we can spend all our time on the weaknesses, but why not really focus on the strengths? I think that's something that came through the coaching. And coaching as a definition for me is it's all about raising awareness and insights lead to action. Action leads to change. So I would much rather have insights about positive things that I can immediately action and change for a positive outcome than really be knee deep in the negative side of things. And talking about the blind spots, interestingly, in my own assessment, there is one. And I suspect there may be other people listening to this that have the same blind spot as I, just because this podcast is listened to by a lot of strategic thinkers and HR strategic level individuals. And for me, strategic thinking came out top. And you were talking about how we're trying to think 2 steps ahead. But that often means I can interrupt. I sometimes really struggle to wait to find out where someone's going when I think I already know the answer. And it is a blind spot, because sometimes if you do jump in, you realize the answer you think they're going to come to isn't the answer at all. And that's where it can get found out. And sometimes patience is a real thing I've got to really be aware of sometimes when people are making a point. Don't always jump in really, really quickly. So,
100%. And also, I'll just add to that even as there's a natural inclination for you to get to the end, or for you to jump in, it's because you want to quickly get to the end. So every time I'm talking to somebody with strategic, I always have to teach them, you need to show people around you that all you need are the top 3 most salient points of the conversation. I don't need war and peace. Just give me the most critical pieces, because with those pieces, that's where I will activate. And really what you're saying, that's where my strategic talent will activate and work at its best. If I'm bored to death, there's going to be a quickening in me that, come on, hurry up, get to the end. And that's where that part of you that wants to finish off people's sentences is going. Just let's get to it so we can crack on. So there's when we talk about self-awareness, it's being aware of how each talent works, what it needs, what we need to kind of hold back on and be patient with, but what essentially the talent is looking for so it can really work at its best. Now, if you know you've got 10 of these and you know how each one of them work, you get more self-awareness and control of yourself to get the most out of every situation you walk into.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like singing the song, "You Know Me Too Well." But also there's, if you again go back to coaching and the Tim Galloway quote when he wrote the Inner Game of Tennis, it's all about helping people to play their best game. Yes. If we can do that, I think that's really important. So let's bring that into a work context then. What are the professional and commercial applications of using strengths analysis in the workplace?
Yeah. So typically I will always start with a leader, because as we know, it flows from the head down. If the leader's got their head really screwed on, if they really understand who they are and what they're bringing to the table, then it just in a practical sense, in a meeting, they know what expectations they have of themselves. They know what expectations they have of the people that are around them. They know what will excite them. They'll know what annoys them. And they'll also find that there are areas that they really should double down on and really maximize. And then there's the things that they need to watch out for. I've heard many complaints about leaders and the lack of self-awareness that they have. Because they're in that position of power, not many people can speak back to them or challenge them in their approach. Even if you don't get challenged by the people that you are working with, because even when there are things that they don't like that you do, doesn't mean that that's a positive thing. It's never really a positive thing. Number one, you want people to be open with you. But number two, you actually want to bring your own level of self-awareness as to who you are and how you can be around people, because then people then want to follow you. They want to kind of give their all because you're actually a good person to work around. So I start with the leader and help them gain that level of self-awareness as to who they are, how they can maximize. Then I go across the leadership team. So then I'll progress to understand, okay, who are all of the leaders that are leading this business? How do they best play together to get the most out of themselves and the most out of this team dynamic that they've got? And how do they lead the organization as best as they can? And then typically once I've been through that process, they're so bought into the process, they now recognize so much about themselves and those that they work with, that they say it only makes sense to go down to our own teams, our own direct reports and those that flow into them. So then you start to convert the head all the way down to the body, and it becomes a very intelligent organization that are aware of who they are, aware of how to get the most out of themselves, and aware of those that are around them, to really work towards a stronger business approach.
Yeah, nice. So I know that some of the clients you have worked with, there's some big names in there as well, but you've worked with HR leaders specifically. So I know the response you've given there is how it can be effective for leaders per se. But what about for HR professionals specifically? What have been some of the outcomes you've seen, or some of the maybe outcomes, positive impacts that have been had from the work that you've done with HR leaders specifically?
So it's a double-edged sword here. HR leaders have lots of different pressures, and we've spoken about this in the past. Yeah. They've got the macro company issues that they have to look out for, i.e., almost they sit at the bridge between senior leadership and the rest of the business. They have to represent the rest of the business to senior leadership, but then they also have to represent senior leadership back to the business in terms of policies and decisions that are being made. So on one hand, they've got that bridge is a very pressurized position that they have to balance. And just on the basic level, I act as an out. A place where people in that position can just vent their frustrations, be able to just talk freely about the pressure that they're under, because it's a lot of pressure to sit in that position. We've also spoken about the fact that there are so many different almost initiatives and trends and things that come into the HR world. And when we say the HR world, it's the world, but HR has to process it into the business, that also HR leaders have to manage. So from a point of view of who is supporting the HR leader, I come into that space where I really help people just have that space to offload and to think in a safe space about how they want to move the organization forward, how they want to think about initiatives, kind of hidden thoughts that they can't necessarily say to other people because they've got that position. On the
presumably, so I don't mean to, there's my interrupting. See, that's my strategic. I'm going to excuse it for that reason. But I'm thinking from an HR leader's perspective, presumably, and maybe not, maybe you can, but you could probably use the Clifton Strengths analysis to also guide them to know who may be the best position to lead particular projects potentially or programs. Or have you used it then to help work out why people would sit in the right roles for particular projects, so it all kind of fits together like a jigsaw and becomes more impactful or more effective? Or is that not a way that it's used?
No, and literally that's what we're going to talk about. When a HR leader really gets the understanding of this is how much it's helped me in understanding how I relate to the business, who I am, and how I can best use my talents, it then naturally progresses to how can our organization really utilize strengths as a whole. And so we can start, and I've worked with a leader in New York just around even seeking the right people to fill a particular role. And I won't say that they're looking for specific strengths, because that's not necessarily fair, many routes to success, but what type of person were they looking for? And we took a higher level strengths approach to understanding what is the right person to fit into a role, all the way through into, actually, I've got particular people in roles right now, and we might call them C graders, D graders, E graders, but actually, is there a misfit between the talents and the strengths that they have and what the job requires?
Sure.
Actually, can we shift people across and get a better fit? They're not actually misfits, they just misfit the position. Can we slide them over to somewhere which will get
round
more
peg,
out
square
of
hole?
Exactly.
Yeah. Put it by a round
even
hole,
all the way,
work reasonably.
Yeah, absolutely. And even all the way to people actually having to exit the business. Can we give them a really good send-off in that you weren't necessarily the right fit here, but can we add strengths assessment and the strengths kind of understanding to helping you find your next role? So it just adds that kind of softer cushion to people exiting the business. So all the way through, the strengths approach has a massive application.
So I have to ask the question. Obviously, you are a Gallup Strengths aficionado, and you're bought into the concept they do. And as someone who's been a recipient of that strength assessment, it's something that I've been impressed with as well. And I mentioned earlier that I've been very skeptical about psychometric testing. And I'm as a qualified coach myself, I don't tend to use psychometric assessments in the work that I do. But for others, they really, really are bought in. And there's some really, well-received other psychometric assessments out there. One in particular that gets talked about a lot is the insights reports, the idea of colors and how colors work together, putting reds with greens and green, and being able to identify what color someone is will help teams become more effective is one example. You've got Myers-Briggs, you've got many out there.
Yeah.
How is this one different? What are your view on the others that exist? And I guess, maybe a bit of a psychometric overview to bring this into context would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I get asked this question quite a lot. I have a fondness for actually all of the other assessments that are out there, because we're all working towards the same thing, to help people become more self-aware as to who they are. A more self-aware world is a better world. I think the difference is with colors and Myers-Briggs and some of the other ones, it's the application afterwards. What can I do with that information to help me become better than I am today? If I know my colors, I think that's fantastic. It just quickly being able to assess how I might compare to somebody else. But where I always use this analogy, some of those other assessments bring you almost to the edge of the city, but Clifton Strengths brings you right to the door of your house. It gives you so much insight as to, this is a 3-bedroom house. It has heated floor. It has a loft extension, an extension at the back, like actual detail. So now, rather than just knowing that I am 4 letters and it gives me a rough understanding of who I am, now I can see clearly 10 individual knobs that I'm going to walk into every single interaction within my organization. I'm going to approach every single task where I'm going to go back to my family and use. And now I know this one is on overdrive. I need to turn that down right now. This is one that I should be using, I could be using. I need to turn that up right now. And it gives you a higher level of control over who you are as an individual. And that's necessary when we're in sort of high stakes environments, high pressure environments, different sort of major decisions that need to be made. You need to understand what's going on within me so you can get the best out of yourself.
Yeah, nice. For those interested in listening, maybe you are, maybe not, I'll let you know. My top strengths were strategic thinking. We talked about achiever, ideation, futuristic, woo, which was a new one for me. And that's, I suspect, what my wife may have as a high strength, but we'll see. Positivity. And when I met you, I thought positivity would be number 1. And I was disappointed to see it down at number 6. But when we explained it, it now makes sense. Activator, input, learner, and communication was down in number 10. But obviously, as we know now, that everyone's strength assessment is going to come up with a slightly different result. And it's working through that and understanding what those terms mean. Perhaps it's worth, before we open the HRD Vault, I wonder if you can bring the woo into the context. This is a new term for me, but I was fascinated to understand what woo meant, particularly when it came in as one of my top 5 strengths. It came in at 5th place. What is woo for those that are listening?
For context, my wife has woo as well. It's probably one of my favorite strengths. I've got it down at 15, but I still utilize it. But woo stands for winning others over, WOO. And it is this incredible ability to be able to walk into a room and just connect with lots of different people, not to a very deep level, but to a level where you understand this person might be a little bit uptight. What do I need to say to help them relax and just to feel at one and at home in the environment that we're in? So somebody with woo typically is really great at networking events. They go in, they talk to this person, they flutter over to this person, and back and forth they go. But in every interaction, they just make people feel as at home and as relaxed as they can. And it's normally with some humor, with a story, or with a joke, something that just helps people really relax and become just at home. And so where you've got woo, and then you've also got positivity at number 6, so we're at number 5, positive number 6, that creates this double dose of positivity, looking at who's feeling down, what can I do to bring them up? And then woo, who's feeling a bit uptight, how can I make them relax? You're almost just like a warm blanket that just goes around hugging people and making them feel really calm.
I'll take that. That's how you're making me feel now, John. I'm liking it. I'm enjoying it. It's good. It's good.
Fantastic talent.
But let's open the HR L&D Vault then. If you could give one piece of advice to the world, John, what would it be? Stop
looking around and start looking in the mirror. Because what you need is right inside of you. It's not in anybody else. There might be some things that people might be able to sharpen in you, but all that you need is literally packed inside you like a toolbox or a picnic. You just need to open it up and go deeper into it.
Love that. And the idea of gentle reflections can be so powerful when we take the time. A lot of it's time. We don't have the time, or we say we don't believe we have the time to do it. But the idea of having some gentle reflective time, so powerful. So I love that.
And if you have the just really quickly,
go on. Yes, of course.
When we say sometimes we don't have time, also, like even growing up, our parents have been so busy working that they haven't necessarily, number one, known what to look for, or number two, spent the time investing in us to help us see all some of those things that are really great. So we're not used to spending the time investing in us, and we also don't have any context as to looking at ourselves in a more positive light. It's only those things that we've seen as negative. So it's a new concept for people to even spend time just looking at themselves and concentrating on themselves. But you need to embrace it, because that's where you find what you're looking for.
Great point. I'm glad you came in. If you had the opportunity, what advice would you give to a younger you just starting out in this new world of work?
Tricky. Yeah, so I went to a all boys school and a private school and then a boarding school, and I spent most of my time trying to again be like everybody else. And actually, I've got a very unique story, a unique background, and a unique set of talents. And again, it's similar. I would have just spent more time cultivating who I am, to be the unique side of myself, rather than, again, just trying to be more posh or more British or more X or more Y. I would have just focused and said that I am enough, and just and pushed through on that perspective.
I love that. You know what? It reminds me of a parable. I love my parables, and there's one here that comes to mind when you mention that. And it's about a monk is walking by with his people, his followers, and he sees a snake that's been burnt by a fire. Right. So he reaches into the fire to save the snake, and the snake bites him continuously, all the way up the arms, venomous snake, bite. Yes. But he continues to rescue the snake, and he pulls it and frees the snake from the fire. And the followers say to him, "Why did you rescue the snake when it continued to bite you over and over again?" His answer was, "The nature of the snake is to bite. My nature is to save and protect."
Amazing.
So it doesn't matter what the snake does. That's who I am. That's what he is, and it's fine. And I just thought that's quite powerful sometimes. Sometimes we change who we are because we think we need to be something else, or someone else changes who are our natural, what comes natural to us. And I think that's quite a nice, simple story to use.
And again, I'd add to that, like, especially in leadership, we have an archetype of what we might have seen as been previous leaders before us,
Absolutely.
as to who we should be. And some leaders are very decisive, commanding, and big personalities. And so I'll find someone who is actually a lot more calm, a lot more people focused, a lot more consultative, trying to change themselves to be like this commander. But that's not who you are. And actually, if you take who you are, really maximize that, people actually fall in love with who you are, your very nature, and you'll become that leader who you were born to be, not wasting your time trying to become someone else. So I fully agree with that. Absolutely.
100%. Also leads lovely into my last question of the vault, but also when we talk about leadership, the idea of command and control is gone anyway. I'm a big fan of Succession, and you watch Logan in that, and he rules with command. But actually, the most common answer, I won't give away now, I'll be interested to get your responses, but it's not that power that people perceive to be as strong as leadership quality now. It's something else. I'll tell you what the most common answer is after I've asked you, in case you give the same response. But It leads me nicely into my final question. What is the guiding principle or behavior you've seen in every great leader that you've worked with?
I think it's going to again go back. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's focus on what you do best. And as they do, it's almost like they are able to bring out the best in other people that are around them, because they're being who they are and encouraging others to be who they are. They're not trying to conform everybody to be the same. They are expecting people to bring their own unique selves, because that's exactly what they need. So I think it's actually a celebration of uniqueness that has been that guiding factor. I've seen it in Elon Musk. I've seen it in some of the other big leaders. They want you to bring who you are right to the table. So I think that's what I'd say.
Listen, I couldn't agree more. But if people want to find out more about where to connect with you online, where can I direct them?
So if you go to my website, I've got a big LinkedIn presence. So if you just find me, John Obidipe, on LinkedIn, you see my name in the caption. But I've also got my website, catalystgrowthcoach.co.uk, and then you can find me there. I love just to have conversations with leaders about some of the challenges that they're facing, individuals that they have in the organization that they're having a bit of trouble with, all of the problems that they need to solve. I love having conversations. So feel free to just drop me a line and we can connect.
Fantastic. I will also include a link to those links in the show notes as well. So it's just to remind everyone, catalystgrowthcoach.co.uk. I'll also include a one-page brochure all about John Obidipe's services and coaching, ethos, things like that. So have a look at that. There'll be a link straight through. And I'll also put his email in there as well. But for those that are listening, and perhaps you can't access the show notes, it's coach@catalystgrowthcoach.co.uk. And of course, if you're an HR L&D professional listening to this podcast and you have an HR related vacancy that you might need some support with, please do get in touch with either myself or any of my wonderful team at jjrecruitment.com. A link for that will also be in the show notes. Just leaves me to say a huge thank you, John Obidipe. Thank you for joining me today. It's been fantastic. It's been, I've really enjoyed meeting with you. I've really enjoyed my own assessment. I hope others follow suit. And thanks for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of the HR L&D podcast. I hope you found this discussion informative and thought-provoking, and that it gave you actionable insights to help you drive your HR agenda forward. Please remember to subscribe to the show so you never miss a future episode, and I'd also love to hear from you. So if you enjoyed this show, please do leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps me to ensure I can continue to bring you the topics and guests that matter most to you. Oh, and don't forget to share this show with your colleagues and fellow HR leaders as well. The more we spread the word, the more we can grow our community of HR professionals who I know are all as dedicated to driving the future of work forward as I am. Thanks, of course, for tuning in. My name is Nick Gay. Please do look me up on LinkedIn and send me a connection request. It would be great to get connected. In the meantime, I look forward to bringing you the next episode of the HR L&D podcast real soon.